Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing The Dead Keep by CMON Games. Now, before we get into it, usual disclaimers, this is a prototype review, so keep in mind that everything, rules, components, all that stuff, subject to change, and past that, also keep in mind that Board Game Co, that we did paid content around this game, and if that muddies the water too much for you, I completely understand that. But, let's go ahead and dive into this. This is The Dead Keep. This is CMON's newest game, currently on GameFound. It's a pre-order, not a campaign. You can go ahead and get it, there's some pre-order bonuses, things like that, but the basic idea is this seems to be built on the Zombicide system, taking a lot of the core mechanics of Zombicide in play and bringing it into a new game that maintains those bones while iterating on it to a large extent, putting in a dash of Massive Darkness, a dash of Clue Let Me Die, and a dash of just its own thing as it mixes it all together to give you a campaign-based dungeon crawler with episodic, with the ability to go into episodic games as you go. Now, I'm not going to do a full rules overview. There's already a preview that Meg did on the channel. There's already 2 gameplays you can check out, but the basic idea of it is on your turn, as your heroes, you're going to have 4 to 6 heroes generally, at least from what I can see. You're going to have 4 to 6 heroes in play, and those heroes are going to have 3 actions per turn. You're going to use those actions to go ahead and open doors, to explore the dungeon, to move from zone to zone, to attack enemies in your spot, to search for new items, things like that, to exchange items with other characters. Basic ideas of attack, move, search, things like that as you go through this game. Other stuff, gathering objectives, some small stuff like that. And when all the heroes have done taking their 3 actions, let's say you have 4 heroes, you've taken 12 actions total, at that point the enemies go. Enemies are going to start moving around the board and attacking you when able, and then when they're all done doing that, they will then spawn new enemies, which means the game starts off fairly straightforward, as you have to deal with a very small amount of enemies on the board, but then things start to escalate because enemies start spawning, you start killing them. As you kill them, you start ramping up your own levels. As you ramp up your own levels, the board starts spawning more enemies because you're a larger threat, so there's more enemies coming into play, and that escalation is constantly present as you go through whatever the scenario goal is. Now, in The Dead Keep, those scenario goals are going to vary. The base game is going to come with 10 scenarios, 12 scenarios. You're going to have the first 8, and then you'll branch into 2 different final scenarios depending on which pathway you take in this campaign-driven game. And again, you could play single shots, but you're going through a campaign experience, and you're going to be going through each of these, giving you different variations of what you're trying to do, usually involving killing some final boss along the way, but possibly some other things as you go through it. But the basic idea is you're trying to accomplish your goals before eventually the enemy hordes overwhelm you entirely. That's the core idea. Now, I will talk about some of the things that are different. You know what? I won't actually. I was gonna say the things that are different than Zombicide, but I'll talk about things that are different than Zombicide and the way it branches out while I talk about things I like and don't like, because I think those will all feed into this. But the core idea is this is a dungeon crawling game where you're going to be rolling a lot of dice, using your weapons to kill lots of enemies, from basic enemies to monsters to the full-on boss that you're trying to take out. It's going to be a lot of chaos, as you can see from the ending of this scenario over here, where we have an absolute ton of stuff on the board and one very dead boss who may not have died so quickly and easily in the game. But yeah. Let's go ahead and dive into a review. Let's dive into my thoughts on this, what it does, what I like. I'm going to be focusing a lot on the differences between this and Zombicide, because again, I do think it does very much. I've had, some of my videos on this game, I've had people comment about how often I said the word Zombicide, and I will, because it does feel like it's very much based on that Zombicide framework. It's hard not to compare them, given the extent and degree of similarities, while I also want to emphasize that it very much does feel a step different than Zombicide. It does not feel like simply another Zombicide game in a Zombicide series. It feels like a small diversion for Zombicide, similar to the way Massive Darkness was, similar to the way Clue Let Me Die was, similar to that kind of approach, even though it has those bones in place. Let's talk about my review, starting off with what I like, don't like, and see others not liking, although I guess starting with ease of play, which I usually do, because ease of play is an interesting one. Because as much as there will be people who are frustrated that this just feels like another Zombicide game because it will to some extent, what it does do, one of the benefits of that, is the idea that it makes this game easier to table if you are familiar with that system. Diving into The Dead Keep as a Zombicide player is going to be very familiar. You'll understand the core concepts. You will have to learn the differences, and one of the downsides is you can find yourself tripping up on the differences when you have small, nuanced differences as opposed to a completely different game. But overall, despite the 30 pages of rules you're going to have to go through, a lot of it will feel very similar if you've played any Zombicide experience. So that's a pro with the potential con attached to it as well. Game time is going to vary drastically. So far, the scenario lengths that the game has given us for the 2 scenarios we've had a chance to dive into, they only are 2 scenarios currently in the prototype, but so far the scenario lengths are overly optimistic at best. I believe they're called 60-minute scenarios, and they've generally been an hour and a half to 2 hours for those, if not, yeah, I think the first one's an hour and a half without getting very far, and the second one was like nearly a full 2 hours to get to the end. So I think the scenario lengths are fairly optimistic right now, but I think you're probably looking in that 90 minutes to 3 hours length depending on the scenario you're playing with. Which is where I'm going to start with the what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. Starting off with what I like, because there's a lot here that I enjoy, and the starting basis is that it does feel like a Zombicide game. It's hard to ignore that if I dive into this. I am a big fan of the Zombicide genre. I have not kept every Zombicide game. I have not loved every Zombicide game. Some have worked for me, some have not. Some have been too easy. Some have felt like not enough of a diversion from the originals. And others have been games that I've enjoyed. Personally, my favorites so far have been Zombicide Black Plague, as well as Marvel Zombies have been my two favorites so far, with Zombicide Undead or Alive taking a nice third place amongst those as well. But a lot of them I've enjoyed, a lot of them not so much. Well, not so much. A lot of them have not worked for me as much, and this does build off that system, a game system that I already know I like and enjoy, and it feels familiar, and to that extent, it's both a good thing and a bad thing, because it's a good thing, because it's already feeding into a genre and a game type I like, while it's also a bad thing, because inherently when that happens, it's being compared to the best I already own in that genre, and that's where you find whether games are left lacking or not. If a game that feels very different from anything in your collection almost has an easier time staying, at least for me, because at least it feels different. Versus if you're a great game, but you feel similar to a game that's greater, that's a very hard thing to figure out whether I care enough to want both of them. So again, the fact that it feels like Zombicide is a good starting point to me liking it, but it's a different conversation as to how much I like it and whether I want to hold on to something like that or not. But again, building off the bones of a system I like is already a good thing. If you like the Zombicide type of game, if you like that idea of wandering through a dungeon, of dealing with hordes of enemies, rolling tons of dice, gathering new loot, feeling yourself power up as you get new abilities, all while the enemies ramp up alongside you, if you like that type of game, this is already giving you that type of game. Which is where we'll start focusing on some of the differences between Zombicide and the Dead Keep, and those differences are things that, for the most part, I generally like so far. We have the continuation of the Cthulhu Death May Die type of approach with these bosses, that when you fight and deal with the boss, you're going to basically kill the thing, and then it's going to respawn and pop up somewhere else. We have to kill it again and again and again, and the amount of times you have to kill it depends on what has happened throughout the course of the game, how much noise or how much activity you've had within the dungeon as you went adventuring. And so I like that mechanic in Cthulhu Death May Die. I like it here, although with the caveat. We're going to come back to that caveat later. I like the general mana management. So one of the nice things in the game is you have these pools of mana in the game, and these pools of mana are giving you the ability to gather mana, either from individual areas or from fountains, and then using that mana to power either abilities or items themselves, or sometimes to be able to use your innate inherent ability to just roll handfuls of extra dice to kill whatever you're trying to do. But the mana management is a nice element. It will feel a drop familiar to Marvel Zombies. If you've played Marvel Zombies, you have that power management system. This is different in the way it's implemented, and the very first thing I like is you can't get mana everywhere. In Marvel Zombies, the idea you enhance yourself with power, that power is going to come from anywhere. You just take an action, you get power, and you drive your actions. Over here, you have to be around mana, and while mana is plentiful on the board, it's still not everywhere, which means if you get yourself caught in a situation where there's just no mana wherever you are, you have to find yourself trying to get out of a bad situation to get that, and that will provide moments of tension that I enjoy. So I enjoy both the general resource economy of the mana management, that again will feel somewhat familiar to power in Marvel Zombies, but I also appreciate the differences as far as, you know, you get more from fountains, you get a little bit less from general mana pools, you have to be in specific areas. I like the way that system is added in the game. I like the upgrading and campaign aspects, particularly these talismans over here. These talismans are a whole deck full of powerful cards that give you abilities to kind of customize your characters and give them ongoing things that help from campaign to campaign, because yes, your characters have to level up, you have to kill hordes of zombies or undead or whatnot, and gather power to be able to, it's actually called, I think it's called AP, advancement points maybe? But you're going to be gathering all that to power up within a game, and you will have elements of weapons and things you keep game to game, but the biggest thing that's going to be the game-to-game advancement is going to be a set of talismans, where you can have a bunch of them and pick up to 3 per scenario that are going to give you your own customized tool set of how your characters are, and that's going to give you a degree of campaign advancement in the game, of reasons to feel more powerful as you go through a game system that is also powering up alongside you. Because one of the things that this game does differently is that not only do the enemies spawn based on your own individual threat level, the enemies also spawn based on their own deck that they're going to be going through, that a deck of cards level 1 through 5, and as you go through the game, as you go through the 1s, they get to the 2s, and the 2s are stronger. But again, even within that system, all the cards are stronger if you're stronger. So there's 2 ways the enemies ramp up: time and you yourself ramping up in the game. As you go through later scenarios, you'll find that you won't even have the 1s in the game. You'll start with the 2s, maybe you'll start with the 3s. So the game is ramping up alongside you, so it has that degree of progression. And again, I want to be very clear, I have not had the chance to see the full campaign progression progression yet, and I will talk about that more in final thoughts, or even, well, we'll go talk about it more, but overall the game is going to be progressing alongside you. I like that element as well. I like the escalation of the enemies I just covered. I like the variety of enemies. One of the things I've complained about almost every single Zombicide game except Black Plague, because Black Plague has done a tremendous job of the sheer zombie variety, is as time has gone on, CMON has backed down from the amounts and types of zombies you're facing off within a game, and in the Dead Keep, it seems to be bringing that back, at least to some extent. We're going to have in the base game, I believe there are 5 different types of enemies, I believe, maybe even 6. The crawlers are not really the same, but you're going to have your basic walkers, your basic, and familiar, let's go with basic terms. I don't know you have your footmen, I believe. I don't remember all the terms. So you have footmen, your shadow guards, which are basically stronger and deal more damage to you. You have your horsemen, which are going to be stronger and move faster in the game. You're going to have your dogs, which run incredibly fast. They take 3 activations a turn. You're going to have your Deadeye walkers, which shoot down a lane, hitting you easily. You're going to have 5 basic enemy types, plus of course the crawlers, which are going to pop up when you search. So you're going to have 6 different enemy types, although 5 different enemy types. You're going to have 5 different enemy types in the base game, which is already a nice solid addition. I feel like I might be missing a type. Am I missing a type? I'm not sure. But then past that, you're also going to have these nobles that spawn enemies. So you're going to have a bunch of nobles wandering around the board, similar to the Doctor Strange, or similar to the Necromancers and Black Plague. But then you also have hordes of what effectively are similar to abominations, these monsters that are their own unique threat, and then of course you have bosses as well. So you in the base game you have some basic variety of enemies, and the expansions will introduce even more, some goblins and dwarfs and other things as well in the expansions. So you have a decent amount of enemy variety, which is one of the things I've missed a lot in most of the recent iterations of Zombicide that have come out. So I appreciate that as well. And the multiple types of enemies, the main boss, the abominations or monsters, as well as the undead in general, just gives you different focuses to go on through the game. So for the most part, the changes that are present here seem to be good changes that enhance the gameplay experience. And also, I don't think I really talked about this, but the game is hard. It is punishingly hard, which is one of my favorite things to have in a Zombicide game. I like the idea. I don't like games where I don't feel like I could win, but I do like games where I feel like, I could. I'm going to dive back in and get it done. Whether I win or lose doesn't make a difference to me, but the idea that I feel that tension in this game, I feel that I'm it starts off and powerful enough, I get what I need done, and then the board starts to fill up with more and more enemies, and it becomes a bigger and bigger challenge to make your way through it and actually have a hope of winning. This game so far has proven to be hard, which is something I like in this series of games. As far as things I don't like, there's really 2 things, or really 1 thing plus hesitancy. And the problem is that 1 thing is a big thing for me. The hesitancy is something I said I'll come back to, which is the idea that I haven't played through a full campaign. And the problem with that is CMON's campaigns have been hit or miss over the years as far as whether they are balanced properly and give you a good experience the whole way through. Do you, as the characters, ramp up too much so that by the time you get to episode 5, you're basically stomping through the enemies and there's no balance? I don't know yet, because I haven't gotten to episode 5. Is the entire campaign way too hard and they don't really understand that you're not escalating fast enough? I don't know yet, because I haven't had the chance to do that. And it's not just an unknown, it's an unknown combined with the fact that CMON's campaigns in the past have not always been as well balanced as I would like, and that does mean that it's, if this is a campaign is primarily being offered as a campaign-based experience, well, I sure hope they get that right. So it's a hesitancy, not necessarily not a critique, not based on where things are right now, but it's just one where I just don't know how things will play out, and so I'm a drop worried, and we'll see how that goes. The thing I don't like so far, the only real thing I don't like from this experience, is the way the boss respawns. If you've played Cthulhu Death May Die, and I realized throughout this review I'm mentioning all of the games and comparing them to all of the games, but there are comparisons to be made, so it is what it is. But when you deal with bosses in the Dead Keep, the bosses seem to spawn, at least based on the current spawn deck, the bosses always seem to pop right to where the other adventurers are, and not in a way that makes it feel like the bosses is interestingly jumping from location to location on the board, and that's something that I really hope they change, because I love the way Cthulhu Death May Die does it. The way Cthulhu Death May Die has the boss jumping up across various points on the board, I think is phenomenal. I don't think the Dead Keep has that down in a way that is satisfying, at least not yet. And I do think things like this require a lot of balance and a lot of work. It's much easier to critique a system than it is to build a system that works. But the current system for me doesn't feel as ideal as I would like. It doesn't feel as, what's the word for it? There's a word that I'm not thinking of, but it doesn't feel as dynamic as I would like. It feels a little bit more static, and also not just static, but not even that. it's a problem to a certain extent with the boss going to be popping multiple times and then just hitting you for 45 damage where you are. I think that right now the current system doesn't work as well as I would want it to work. I want more dynamism to where the boss shows up. And it's, again, without the idea of having these portals that you do in Cthulhu May Die, these little spawn points on the board, you could have other ways of doing it. You could have the starting spawn point. You could have whatever monsters there, the largest horde on the board, the smallest horde on the board. Right now it seems to alternate between, you know, the least adventurers and the most adventurers. That's all it really seems to do as far as where the boss spawns up, which not only gives you the ability to kind of play that game, to gamify that aspect and try to find your way through it in a way that is not taking advantage of the system, but it's also just less dynamic, it's less fun. And I really hope, to me, the Cthulhu Death May Die system of how the boss spawns and dies is excellent, and I think this one could stand to be better. It also could stand to be better in the way that it makes the boss more threatening. Right now, these spawn cards, basically, all they do is they give you an extra spawn of enemies that you have to deal with, and then the boss re-pops up again. I would want more threat on the boss too, something that's actually different other than just, hey, you kill it, you kill it, you kill it, and each time it spawns more enemies, gives some degree of escalation and threat to the boss's abilities. But again, those things, I don't know if we'll see those changes at all. I don't know if we do. I really hope we see some tweaks to the boss death system, because that's something that, while fine, it is totally fine for the record, it's not a bad system. I guess I'm just used to something better from CMON themselves, and this one feels like a step down, and I really hope that that's something that's tweaked. As far as I can see, others not liking, there's a bunch of things in that category. There's a ton of luck in this game, and these types of games. You'll be rolling dice left, right, and center. The spawn cards that come out are going to be drastically different. Some spawn cards are going to be terrible situations, some spawn cards are going to be not that bad. You're going to have, it's a hard and overwhelming game, which again, I personally like, but you may not enjoy that. Enemies get more extra activations in this system, seemingly, than other Zombicide systems. So you're going to have a lot of times where enemies are getting extra activations, although they have tweaked it so it's really more monsters getting the extra activations as opposed to entire hordes of enemies. There's a lot of things in this game that might make this type of game not a game for you. The idea of just generally having tons of chaos, tons of luck, tons of things happening, all while you try to make your way through it. And then of course there's the last thing where, especially if you're trying to figure out how many projects you can get, how many games you can get a year with a limited budget, this might feel too similar to other games you have. If you already have Black Plague, if Marvel Zombies, Cthulhu Death May Die, then you already have games that are similar to this. And I think there are a lot of things that make this different. I think it's worth hunting down if you think you want this system. I think it feels different. But if you're also working with a limited budget, then I would encourage you to get games that are much more vastly different than the small differences you're going to see at play from one game system to the next within these types of games from CMON. As far as final thoughts on the Dead Keep, I overall really enjoy this game. I like a lot of the changes they made. I like everything. I like the sheer degree of hardness here. I like the zombie variety. I like basically everything feeding into the system I really enjoy. For right now, I'm giving it a 4.5 out of 5. And it is a tentative thing. I think it would go up. For context, Marvel Zombies, Cthulhu Death May Die, Black Plague, those are all 5 out of 5 games for me. Massive Darkness is a 4.5 out of 5. So these are all types of games that very much lean into what I like, and in a lot of ways, the Dead Keep enhances what some of those games do. I really want the boss system to be slightly different, and I do have to pull back a drop until I see how the campaign goes. So for right now, it's a 4.5 out of 5. I think it has the potential to be a 5 out of 5, but we're going to take time and a little bit more game time, a little more games, a little more expansion stuff, and seeing the final product before I'm willing to rate it finally there. In any case, until next time. Oh wait, recommendations. Recommendations should be pretty obvious at this point, but if you like this game, you can check out Black Plague, Marvel Zombies, Cthulhu Death May Die, or Massive Darkness. All of those will have elements that are very similar. If you like one of them, you're likely going to like most of them, and if you like this one, you're more likely you might want to try finding those to see if they're games for you. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.